Hey guys, I want to talk about a tactic that a lot of people don't use in interviewing that I think is really excellent. And I don't hear a lot of people really coaching on this, and I don't think a lot of particular people use this. This is great for anybody who's been in a leadership role or who has led like a project, who's been a project manager or led initiative or project at any organization. Most of you don't have a problem talking about, what the success you've had in your career and how to describe that. But where we stumble sometimes is talking about maybe where we led a project and things went sideways and how did you course correct. Imagine if you didn't wait for that question, that horrible behavioral question that asks you, tell me a time when you led a project and it went sideways or whatever they ask you, right? But imagine if you brought up something in an interview that took the person who was interviewing you a little bit by surprise. Let me give you an example. And by the way, this only makes sense if it's conversational and it makes sense to the particular position that you're interviewing for. So let's say you're interviewing for a particular role and you know they're going to go through an implementation or they have a large project that is in the near future. And the whole reason that they're interviewing you is because you have that background, whether you have that software or whatever that experience you have had in the past. And that's really appealing to them because they want somebody with that experience for this role. Or maybe they didn't even know that ahead of time, but through conversation, they've discovered that. So a way that I think is really excellent, and again, it's really hard for people to maybe wrap their brain, why would I say something negative about myself instead of positive and success? Isn't that what you're supposed to do in an interview? Yes, of course. But imagine if somebody was, if you were interviewing somebody and they said, I actually worked on a project really similar to this. In fact, we blueprinted it out. Here's how it went. We had picked our vendor. We were very satisfied with the offerings that they were going to give. We had started the project. We're, clicking along, and then all of a sudden, things went sideways. We found out that the vendor that we had chosen may not be the right person, or the right vendor rather, for this particular project we're working on. And so we had to regroup and blueprint again. And then maybe you actually had to look for a new vendor altogether. You regrouped, you started over, and you went on with that project. But through that project, you learned a lot of things. You learned why you maybe picked the wrong vendor. You learned maybe that if you had to do it all over again, you would do X. If you see where I'm going with this, if you're interviewing and you say, hey, you know what, we experienced something similar. Let me tell you what happened and what I learned a lot from. And if I had to do it all over again, here's what I would do differently. And here's what we did when we regrouped. Here's what we ultimately achieved. We achieved even more than we thought we would. And here's what our results were. So I guess if I were chosen for this role, I think I come with a lot of experience. Not just the good and the good experience and the success, but I'm also going to bring what could go sideways and how we course corrected. And again, I learned a lot through that project. Now, if I'm interviewing somebody, that's really important to me. That business intelligence that they bring, the things that and if anybody's been through a project or implementation, we all know it never goes flawless, right? You could have the best plan in place. You could have chosen the best vendor, and it will go sideways at some point. Maybe not huge sideways, but you will definitely have some big bumps in the road. With any implementation, you can't foresee things, or everything rather, that's going to come across when you're going through something like that. So I think if you can bring that up in the interview, again, when it makes sense and when it's conversational, instead of them asking, well, hey, it sounds like you went through that project. What didn't go right? That's what I would ask if I'm interviewing somebody, right? And you should ask. But imagine if you actually gave that information before they even asked. What does that show about you? One, you're a leader. You are a true leader. You know that, hey, this was going along really well, but we actually made a mistake. And here's what we need to do to regroup. And I got my team together, and here's what we came up with. It also shows you're human and you have humility. Humility is a big thing. I would say with a lot of leaders, they lack empathy and humility and transparency. So if you're transparent in an interview, that also wins some bonus points. You